only one wife, which I think goes back to probably the big problem years ago. And I just want to comment on this. It's a little off the subject here, but this is a problem when parents do what with their kids? Show a little favoritism. Sometimes it's easy to do, you know. You'll have one kid who's always very nice to his parents, very respectful. Another kid who's kind of rebellious, you know, and he's always getting in trouble, you know. That happens in families, and I think we have here a problem with Jacob's family, if I may say that. Jacob was not a perfect person, and I think he had made a tremendous problem here in showing favoritism toward those two boys born to Rachel. Now, we can sit back and understand why he did that. That was the one he had worked for. That was his first wife, at least the one he wanted first. He got kind of ripped off by Laban, if you might remember the story. And Laban sneaks in Leah first. Sorry, Leah. You're better than the first one, but anyway. Snuck in Leah. Pastor Johnson's, no, it wasn't. She was weak-eyed, whatever that means. And then, of course, the concubines. And then, of course, finally Rachel, you know, because she is barren. But anyway, that's his favorite wife. Big problem. Verse 28. The one went out, the one left me. He left out. He went out from me, which is interesting. He went out to do what? And Jacob here, verse 28, Judah is speaking, reminding him what his father said. Why did the son go out? He didn't know he was going out to die. He sent him out. He sent him out. You remember the story? Why? And Jacob may be taking a little bit of responsibility here himself. I don't know, which is why he grieves so much. Because he's the one who sent Joseph out to do what again? Check on his brothers. Why didn't Jacob get the signals, the clues that his brothers were insanely jealous? And, you know, when the dreams have been told by Joseph, Jacob must have been in on this. In fact, Jacob himself says it. Should we and your mother bow down to you? And certainly Jacob himself thought this guy's got kind of a big head on himself. Why is he telling us all these dreams? But he sends his son out into harm's way, basically. And it may be that Jacob here for years had blamed himself. And by the way, that's another problem of being a parent, isn't it? If our kids have problems or get hurt or something, we tend to do what? Blame ourselves. If I had done this, if I had done that, and we take all the blame on ourselves. And that's the trouble of being a parent in a certain sense. And by the way, I don't think we ever get over it, do we? And then we come have grandkids, and we blame ourselves for what happened to them, right? Just like poor Jacob here, blames himself probably for what happened to Joseph. He went out from with me, and I said, surely a wild animal has torn him. And if you look back at chapter 37, verse 33, you don't need to read, I'll read it for you. It's when the brothers bring back Joseph's coat, whether it was multicolored or a long one reaching to the feet, which is what I think. The Hebrew text doesn't say multicolored. It actually says one reaching to the ankles and to the wrists, which suggests, if you remember back several weeks ago, that is not the kind of clothing one wears who is a blue-collar worker. You know what I mean? That is the kind of cloak a person wears who's white-collar, who doesn't have to work out in the fields. Notice I said out in the fields. White-collar people do work sometimes. Right? In other words, by giving him this royal coat, so to speak, he was saying that Joseph is the heir. He is the head of the family. He is my firstborn. He gets the rights. You know, I think it's later under Moses where God gives a law that if a man has 2 or 3 wives, the oldest son of the first wife shall not be deprived of his inheritance because the father loves another wife more. And just a little footnote on that, that while we do not agree with what was going on in that culture, having this idea of polygamy, it was all over the culture. By the way, before we criticize that culture, we're so close to our own culture, we can't see the forest trees from the forest either. I'm sure there are things going on in our culture that we have just accepted as part of our culture, that years from now, centuries from now, people would look back at us and say, what were they thinking? And I don't know, just off the top of my head, I don't know if it's the living together before people are married, or it's divorce issues. I mean, there's things like that that we are starting to get very comfortable with these things. That's just the way it is, right? We try to make the best out of the situation. I'm going to digress here a little bit because that's actually what God does in the Old Testament. He was never pro-polygamy. In fact, if you go back to the book of Genesis, a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. It's single. And I think it was always God's intention for one man and one woman. Yes, not one man and one man. One man and one woman. That's the idea of marriage, right? To speak our own culture here today a little bit too. That was always his intention. However, you were in a culture that was accepted sometimes by necessity because women had no rights in the Old Testament world. Basically, if you had no father, husband, etc., you were doomed to prostitution or being a beggar. That was about it. I don't know if there were any other options. You couldn't move back. I suppose you moved back home with your father, maybe. So it was kind of a bleak situation. So it was actually an act of kindness that men would take 2 or 3 wives so that these poor women had someone to support them and take care of them. However, there were ensuing problems here, always, right? Read the Old Testament, especially in Jacob's family himself, how the wives argue back and forth. And Abraham goes through that issue too. Where was I going with this story? That was going to be too often. I was going to make a point. It was about... what? Yeah, I know something about that. I was off to something. What? He was being fair. I know, he's being fair. I was trying to make a point about it. Well, I guess it was our culture thing. Oh, I know what it was. It's about the Old Testament with Moses. And now he has to make a rule, though, and this is elevating women. That's what I was going to get to. Because we tend to hear this idea today that the Bible is anti-women. It's not at all anti-women like the Quran, for crying out loud. Because even in the Old Testament, while the Bible tolerated polygamy, you do have rules by Moses later. That the first wife, like a woman like Leah, who may not have been as much loved as Rachel, her oldest son should not be deprived of inheritance rights because the father loved a younger wife or a later wife better, if that makes sense. And so the women's rights were protected here, and her children. So in a certain sense, Jacob here makes a big mistake that is later corrected by Moses, or by God through Moses, and what Jacob was intending to do here. I hope I'm not reading too much into this situation here. But what Jacob was intending to do is forbidden later on by Moses. And if you say, oh, I don't think so, well, you know, these people were sinners like us too. I think Jacob gave in to his weakness here. But anyway, back to the text, verse 28. I said, surely a wild beast had ripped him apart. And that's what Jacob had said when they brought that bloody coat. And if I may read that text, what I didn't get to is chapter 37. As they bring in the bloody coat of Joseph, Jacob says, he identified it and he said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt ripped to pieces. Now, if you read back at 37, the brothers remain silent. This is a horrible thing they do to their father. And so for the next 20 years, Jacob has pictured in his mind his son Joseph, whom he loved, the first son of his favorite wife, the one who was to be the heir, the one who he respected more than any of his other sons, ripped to shreds. The sons don't even bring him back. Apparently the animals carried him off somewhere and ate him. And the brothers did not even try to defend him. And the brothers leave Jacob, their father, with this impression and image in his mind for the next 20 years. And with also the idea that it's my fault. I sent him out there in harm's way. And just a little footnote on that, if you remember the story back there, Joseph did not find his brothers right away, did he? He wanders around and he's found by somebody and says, where are you going? And Joseph says, I'm looking for my brothers. And the fellow says, well, they moved on over there. Dothan, I think it is. So Joseph has to go on. So he's out there all by himself, wandering around in the wilderness. And no wonder Jacob blames himself for 20 years that he did this. This is a horrible thing those sons did to their father. When you think about it, try to flesh this thing out a little bit. My son is ripped to pieces. I will not see him again here in this place.